In 1984, a television advertisement aired only once, during the Super Bowl. It cost $1.5 million. It showed a woman throwing a hammer at a giant screen. Apple never ran it again. And yet, it remains one of the most discussed advertisements in television history. What it was selling was not a computer. It was the idea that you are the person who throws the hammer, not the person watching the screen. That distinction between the maker and the consumed would define the philosophy of a man who was told at birth that he was not worth keeping. Joanne Schiebel was unmarried when she became pregnant. Her father threatened to disown her if she kept the child. She gave the baby up for adoption. But she had one condition. The adoptive parents had to be college graduates. The first couple agreed, then changed their minds. They wanted a girl. Clara and Paul Jobs were next on the list. Paul was a machinist. Clara was an accountant. Neither had graduated from college. And Joanne almost refused. She signed the papers only after they promised that the boy would go to university. That boy was Steve Jobs. He learned he was adopted when he was 6 years old. He told a friend down the street. The friend asked, "Does that mean your parents didn't want you?" Steve ran home crying. His parents held him and said, "We specifically chose you." But he never completely believed it. The feeling of being chosen and the feeling of being abandoned lived inside him at the same time, for the rest of his life. By the mid-1980s, Apple had become a billion-dollar company. Steve Jobs was 30 years old, and the board of directors voted to remove him from the company he had created. His own board, his own company. The men he had hired or agreed to hire or failed to stop from being hired. They said he was impossible to manage, and they were not entirely wrong. So he left. He founded a new company, NextXT. It built beautiful computers that almost nobody could afford. Then he bought a company called Pixar for $5 million. At times, he nearly lost everything on it. And then, Toy Story was released. When he bought Pixar, he had no idea he was investing in what would become one of the most important film studios in the world. He bought it because he loved the technology. He built it because he believed in the people. For Steve Jobs, exile became graduate school. He came back different, not softer, but more focused. The return of a man who had already arrived once and been sent away. In 1996, Apple bought NextXT for $429 million. They were not buying the computers. They were buying the operating system. And the man who came with it. Steve Jobs returned to Apple as an advisor. Within a year, he became CEO. He found a company developing 350 products. He canceled 340 of them and said, "We are going to make 4 products. 1 desktop for consumers, 1 laptop for consumers, 1 desktop for professionals, and 1 laptop for professionals." Many people thought he was destroying Apple. He was not destroying it. He was finding it. The iMac arrived in 1998, a year when Apple should have disappeared. Instead, the company sold 800,000 units in 6 months. The boy who had once been told that he was not worth keeping came back and made everything that came before look like rehearsal. Now understand why people love Apple. Not because it works better, not because it looks better, not because the ecosystem is seamless, but because when you hold an iPhone, you hold the argument that simplicity is a form of respect. Most technology says, here are the functions. Here are the buttons. Here is the manual. Figure it out. Apple says, we already figured it out. You just use it. The consumer is not expected to understand the machine. The machine is expected to understand the consumer. This was the philosophy of a man who could not code, who was not an engineer, who did not understand circuits, but who understood what it felt like to struggle with something that did not care whether you succeeded. So he made technology that cared, because he knew the cost of living in a world that didn't. In 2007, Steve Jobs stood on a stage and said, "Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone." In his hand was the original iPhone. He could not have known that he was also holding the object that would help define the 21st century. Or perhaps he did.